we're living in the era of pre-crime, where President Obama is continuing many of the same policies of his predecessor, George Bush, and Vice President Dick Cheney. And there's this incredible reliance on technology to kill people who the United States thinks, doesn't necessarily know, but thinks may one day pose some sort of a threat of committing an act of terrorism or of impacting U.S. interests. And the U.S. wants to shy away from having its own personnel on the ground in countries like Yemen or Pakistan or Somalia, eventually Afghanistan. And so what's happened is that there's this incredible reliance on the use of remotely piloted aircraft, i.e. drones. What we discovered in the course of talking to sources, including this new source that we have who worked with both the Joint Special Operations Command and the National Security Agency, is that the NSA is providing satellite technology and communications intercept technology to the U.S. military special operations forces and the CIA that essentially mimics the activities of a cell phone tower and forces individual SIM cards or handsets of phones. There's two separate devices. When you have your telephone, your mobile phone, you have a SIM card in it, and that can be tracked, but also the device itself can be tracked. And what they do is they force the SIM card or the handset of individuals that they're tracking onto these cell phone networks. And the people don't know that their phones are being forced onto this cell phone tower that is literally put on the bottom of a drone and acts as a virtual transceiver. And so when they are able to triangulate where this individual is, they can locate or track them to within about 30 feet or so of their location. And what we understand is that under the current guidelines issued by the White House, President Obama gives a 60-day authorization to the CIA or the U.S. military to hunt down and kill these individuals who they've tracked with these SIM card tracking technologies or handset tracking technologies, and that they only have to have two sources of intelligence to indicate that this is the individual that they're looking for. Those two sources can be signals intelligence, which is what I've just been describing, and they can also be what's called IMINT, or imagery intelligence, meaning just a satellite image of an individual that they think to be this suspected terrorist. They do not require an actual human confirmation that the individual SIM card or phone handset that they're tracking is in fact possessed by the person that they believe is a potential terrorist. And so what we understand is that this is essentially death by metadata, where they think or they hope that the phone that they're blowing up is in the possession of a person that they've identified as a potential terrorist. But in the end, they don't actually really know, and that's where the real danger with this program lies. And the reason that our source came forward to talk about us is because he was a part of this program and was a participant in operations where he knew the identity of one individual that was being targeted, but other people were killed alongside of that person. And he also said that he just felt incredibly uncomfortable with the idea that they're killing people's phones in the effort to kill them, and that they don't actually know who the people are that are holding those phones.
And the source then is in addition to the documents that Edward Snowden released.
That's correct. In fact, when we first started talking with this source, he was describing the architecture of this program, where the NSA is working closely with the CIA and with the Joint Special Operations Command. And then we were able to validate what he was saying through the documents that were previously provided by the NSA whistleblower, Edward Snowden. Amy, the platform that the CIA is using in Yemen and other countries is known as Shenanigans. It's interesting because the NSA uses a lot of sort of Irish terminology, Blarney Stone and other Limerick, other operations. This one is called Shenanigans, and the platform that's used by the U.S. military is called Gilgamesh, or GMesh for short. And that's this technology where they're able to not only triangulate the position of SIM cards and cell phones, but the NSA also puts a device on the drones that are flying in various countries around the world, known as air handler. And the air handler device is literally just sucking up all of the data around the world. So it's sort of a secondary mission. In other words, in plain terms, what I'm saying is that every time a drone goes out in an effort to track someone or to kill someone, the NSA has put a device on that is not actually under the control of the CIA or the military. It is just sucking up data for the NSA. And as several former NSA people have told us, the NSA just wants all the data. They want to suck it up on an industrial scale. So they're also piggybacking onto these targeted killing operations in an effort to just suck up data throughout the world.
Yet I want to turn to President Obama, who was talking about drone strikes during that first major counterterrorism address of his second term. It was May 23, 2013.
And before any strike is taken, there must be near certainty that no civilians will be killed or injured, the highest standard we can set. Yes, the conflict with al-Qaeda, like all armed conflict, invites tragedy. But by narrowly targeting our action against those who want to kill us and not the people they hide among, we are choosing the course of action least likely to result in the loss of innocent life.
Jeremy Scahill, respond.
Well, first of all, we saw very recently that the U.S. carried out a drone strike that killed many members of a wedding party in Yemen. The question should be asked, how is it that those individuals were selected on that day for that strike? And what the president is saying is very misleading, according to people who actually work on this program. And in fact, when we asked the White House for comment, we went to the National Security Council spokesperson, Caitlin Hayden, and asked directly, is it true that you're ordering strikes where you don't actually have any human intelligence? And the White House refused to directly answer that. They just said, well, we don't select targets based on only one source of intelligence. Well, we knew that already, and we told them that we knew that. The point here is that they don't actually have a requirement to confirm the identity of the individuals that they're targeting, and that's one of the reasons why we're seeing so many innocent people being killed in these strikes. It effectively amounts to pre-crime, where an acceptable level of civilian deaths is any civilians who die in the pursuit of a limited number of so-called bad guys.
Didn't the spokesperson also say, though, confirming that human intelligence was used, tried afterwards, but not before, after a death?
I'm not sure that they're aware of the kind of twisted irony of the statement that they issued to us, because on the one hand, they're refusing to acknowledge that they don't actually need to confirm the identity of people who they're trying to target for death. On the other hand, they say, oh, well, when we kill someone, we do actually confirm whether or not civilians were killed by using human intelligence. So it basically is, the standard is we can kill you if we don't know your identity, but once we kill you, we want to figure out who we killed.
In Yemen, any human intelligence on the ground?
Well, yes. The U.S. does have a very limited presence. In fact, my understanding is that there are small teams of U.S. Special Operations Forces, Navy SEALs, and others that are scattered in various remote locations around Yemen. Of course, the U.S. has long had a counterterrorism presence inside of the Yemeni capital, Sana'a. The CIA also has its own personnel. But I want to underscore something that's a little bit of a nuanced point, and that is that inside of Yemen, the U.S. has largely outsourced its human intelligence to the Saudi government. And the Saudis have been playing their own dirty games and have their own dirty wars inside of Yemen. And many times the Saudis will feed intelligence to the U.S. That is intended to benefit the regime in Saudi Arabia and not necessarily the stated aims of the U.S. counterterrorism program. They also rely on notoriously corrupt units within the Yemeni military and security forces that receive a tremendous amount of U.S. military and intelligence support, and oftentimes will use that U.S. aid to target Yemeni dissidents or to be used in defense of various factions within the Yemeni state. So the short answer, Amy, is yes, there is a very limited U.S. military human intelligence presence on the ground, but most of it, the overwhelming majority, is outsourced to the notoriously corrupt Saudi regime and its operations and operatives and informants inside of Yemen.
The position of the U.S. government is that it's illegal to publish any kind of classified information that you are not authorized to receive. It's, of course, illegal in their view for a government employee or contractor to leak it without authorization, but their view as well is that it's actually illegal, even if you're a journalist, to publish it. And they believe that's especially the case if the information pertains to what they call signals intelligence. And if you look at the Espionage Act of 1917 and other relevant statutes, it does seem to say that it is illegal in the United States to publish that kind of information. The problem for that view is that there's a superseding law called the Constitution, the First Amendment to which guarantees that there shall be a free press and that Congress and no other part of the government has the right to interfere with it. And one of the reasons why the government has been so reluctant about prosecuting journalists for publishing classified information, at least up until now, is because they're afraid that courts will say that application of this statute or the statutes that I've described to journalists is unconstitutional in violation of the First Amendment, and they want to keep that weapon to be able to threaten or bully or intimidate journalists out of doing the kind of reporting that they're doing. So every media lawyer will tell you that before you publish top secret information, it's a good practice for legal protection to ask the government if they want to tell you anything that they think you should know about the implications of publishing this material. They always say, if you publish it, it'll harm national security. But if you're a minimally decent journalist, that isn't good enough. You need specific information about what innocent people will really be harmed if you publish. They virtually never provide any such information. They didn't in this case. And so it was an easy call to make as journalists to tell the American people about the methods that their government are using that result in the deaths of innocent people in ways that are easily preventable.
Glenn, you have been publishing many pieces all over the world since you first broke the story of Edward Snowden with the documents that he has released, downloading 1.7 million documents. What makes this story, the NSA's secret role in the U.S. assassination program, different?
Most of the stories that we've published thus far have been about the way in which the NSA collects signals intelligence, tries to intercept the electronic communications of hundreds of millions, probably billions of people around the world, hundreds of millions inside the United States. And that's what the U.S. government has told the American people is the role of the NSA, is to listen in on the communications of people who are threatening the United States in some manner. This story has very little to do with those prior stories in the sense that this is not a case of the NSA trying to collect people's communications to find who is plotting with whom or what kinds of plots they're engaged in. This is the NSA using a form of signals intelligence to first determine who should be targeted for assassination based on an analysis of their metadata. Has this person called what we think are bad people enough times for us to decide that they should die? And then secondly, trying to help the CIA and JSOC find those individuals who have been put on a list of basically assassination, but not by finding where they are, but by finding where their telephone is, a very obviously unreliable way of trying to kill people that is certain to result in the death of innocent people. And obviously the source who came forward has said that that's exactly what has happened. So it's really an incredibly expanded role that we're revealing that the NSA engages in far beyond what traditionally the American people are told about why this agency exists.
In addition, Jeremy, to the JSOC operator's account, you quote in this first piece for the Intercept.org, Brandon Bryant. Talk about the significance of his experience and who he is.
Right. First, just something to follow up on what Glenn says. You know, the teams from the NSA that are involved with this program are called geolocation cells, and their motto is "We track them, you whack them." Meaning that the NSA will find these individuals and then the military or the CIA will actually conduct or carry out these hits. And as to the other question that we were talking about the relevance for people in the United States, you know, what we've seen, particularly since 9/11, but really throughout U.S. history, is that the kind of technology and the kind of operations, the sorts of tactics that the U.S. uses on citizens of other nations around the world in its military operations or intelligence operations end up coming home to the United States as well. And we believe that what we're doing here is public service journalism, and that the American people have a right to know what kind of technology their government is developing that could potentially be used on them. But also, when innocent people are killed in these operations, it impacts American national security as well, and ultimately undermines our safety because we're creating more new enemies than we are killing terrorists at this point in what's been called, you know, the so-called war on terror. Brandon Bryant is a very important figure right now in this discussion. He spent years as what he called a stick monkey for the U.S. Air Force. He was a drone sensor operator and was part of over 1,000. His unit was part of over 1,500 kill operations around the world when he worked on the drone program. He also was working with the Joint Special Operations Command in the operation to target an American citizen, Anwar al-Awlaki, who, of course, we've talked about many times on this show, was an imam in Washington, D.C., who ended up becoming famous for his sermons denouncing U.S. Around the world and calling for jihad against the United States, armed jihad against the United States. He was killed in September of 2011. And Brandon Bryant had worked on that operation until the spring of 2011 when the CIA took over and took the lead in that. In fact, one of the documents that Glenn and I cite in our piece, and you can see an excerpt of it embedded in our story, reveals that the NSA actually played a role in the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki. And also it is revealed in this document that it was a joint operation by the U.S. military and the CIA. That is a new revelation on this case and could have an impact on the legal case that the family of Anwar al-Awlaki and another American citizen, Samir Khan, have filed against the Obama administration, because this actually shows the U.S. government acknowledging that the NSA, the CIA, and the U.S. military were all involved in that operation. And for Brandon Bryant, this former drone sensor operator, it was the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, and then 2 weeks later, his 16-year-old son, Abdul Rahman, who was also an American citizen, that spurred him to speak out. And he, in fact, says, and we quote this in our piece, that he feels that he became an enemy of the American people by participating in those operations because he denied due process to an American that should have had a right to a trial before being sentenced to death by drone.
You're saying Brandon Bryant said that? That
yes,
he himself
became
an American.
I don't have it in front of me, but you can read his own words in that piece where he essentially says, you know, I swore an oath to the Constitution to uphold it and its values, and then I violated that by participating in the effort to kill this American citizen who, albeit a very bad guy, deserved his day in court rather than to just be sentenced to death by fiat from a president assuming emperor-like powers.
We interviewed Brandon Bryant on Democracy Now! In October. He described his first strike, which took place in Afghanistan in 2007 while he was sitting in a trailer at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada.
We got confirmation to fire on these guys, and the way that they reacted really made me doubt their involvement, because the guys over there, the locals over there, have to protect themselves from the Taliban just as much as we do as U.S. military personnel. And so I think that they were probably in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the way that I've been accused of using poetic imagery to describe it, but I watched this guy bleed out, the guy in the back, and his right leg above the knee was severed in the strike, and he bled out through his femoral artery, and
you saw that on your computer screen.
Right.
It's that detailed.
Yeah, it's pixelated, but I mean, you could see that it was a human being, and you could see that what he was doing, and you could see the crater from the drone, from the Hellfire missile, and you could see probably the body pieces that were around this guy.
And the other two that were in the strike?
They were completely destroyed.
Blown apart.
Blown apart.
So you watched this guy bleed out for how long?
I know, it's a femoral artery, so he could have bled out really fast. It was cold outside, you know, winter time. It seemed like forever to me, but the Predator drone can stay in the air for like 18 to 32 hours, and so they just had us watch and do battle damage assessment to make sure that, to see if anyone would come and pick up the body parts or anyone really cared who these people were. And we watched long enough that the body cooled on the ground, and they called a soft target.
That was Brandon Bryant, the former drone sensor operator with the U.S. Air Force, who's quoted in this first article by Jeremy Scahill and Glenn Greenwald for their new publication, the Intercept.org. And Jeremy, just to follow up, that's the description of what happened in Afghanistan. And the quote you're referring to on the killing of Alaki, this quite remarkable quote of Brandon Bryant saying, "I was a drone operator for 6 years, active duty for 6 years in the U.S. Air Force, party to the violations of constitutional rights of an American citizen who should have been tried under a jury. And because I violated that constitutional right, I became an enemy of the American people."
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that I know Glenn has experienced, and I certainly have experienced in recent months, is that since Edward Snowden made this decision that he was going to forever alter his life by going to Hong Kong and meeting with Glenn and Laura and taking the position that he's taken, he's inspiring other people within these apparatuses to speak out. And I think, courage is indeed contagious. And I think we're going to hear more and more people from within the national security apparatus saying, I believe I'm a part of something that is violating our own Constitution and is violating my own morals and ethics. And I think we're going to see more and more people speaking out. And that's why on our site at theintercept.org, we've created a secure drop center where people can give us tips anonymously, and we will protect their identities. And we encourage people to come forward and to speak about their experiences within what's called the national security apparatus.
The former JSOC drone.
Add just one thing.
Yes, Glenn.
Yeah, sure. Just as far as that clip, that incredibly moving clip that we just listened to, I just want to make 2 quick points about the significance of what we published this morning. There's a lot of debates about journalism and how it should best be practiced, but I think everybody ought to agree that journalism is supposed to be about informing the public of the truth, and especially debunking official lies. And a big part of our story and why we wrote it and published it was because you have President Obama running around saying that we only kill or target people when there's a near certainty there won't be civilian deaths. And of course, we know that to be completely false because the methods that we reported on have almost I wouldn't say a near certainty, but a very high likelihood of killing the wrong people, killing innocent people. But the other thing about it is, back in July, the NSA, in order to propagandize the public, went to the Washington Post to boast about the role they play in the killing program and talked about some of these methods. And the Washington Post just uncritically published what it was they were told. It was just a propaganda piece talking about all the great things the NSA does in helping the CIA and JSOC target people, not a word of the unreliability of these methods or the NSA's role in targeting and killing innocent people. And so part of what we did was to come forward as an antidote to that false propaganda from the president and from the Washington Post and correct the record and make it complete. And that is a big part of what we see as the purpose of our new media outlet, not just to protect and encourage sources, as Jeremy said, to know that they can come forward and have their material reported on aggressively. That's a huge part of what we're doing, but it's also to provide a corrective to the type of quote-unquote journalism that the Washington Post practiced here, where they just mindlessly repeated what government officials told them with no investigation, no critical analyses, and therefore just misleading the public about what it is that is taking place.